I don't think so.
Welcome to Title Adam in the House, the podcast where Florida real estate gets real. Buyers, sellers, builders, and lenders. If you're in the game, then you belong in the house. Let's get you to the closing table fast and with less stress. Let's go. Everybody, it's Title Adam. We're in the house today. I'm with a friend and local attorney, Kevin F. Jursinski. Kevin's more than a real estate attorney. Kevin is triple board certified in real estate law, construction law, and business litigation. But we're here today to talk a little bit in the house about his new book. Kevin's not new to publishing, but this is a brand new one that came out. It's available for you on Amazon.com. You've got to get a copy today. I just finished it up. Kevin, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for inviting me, Adam. It's great to be here.
Kevin is a friend of mine. Kevin is my attorney. He's a friend of my family and was my father's attorney as well. I'm painting the picture to you. We're dealing with an individual here that's highly professional, deals in facts. Details are critical and the stakes are high at all times. We're not dealing with someone who's a hobbyist that just decided to write a fictional novel. We're talking about someone who has taken facts over decades and has built the story to tell you now about how the assassination of JFK had a major impact on his generation of young Americans. The book is available on Amazon today. I'd like to get right into it and talk about it. A lot of the story has to do with a warrant officer that you interviewed that had a very consequential role in delivering secrets to Russia. And I don't want to give away the entire story, but we're talking about, is it Helmick?
Joseph George Helmick, yes.
Okay, and this was an interview that you've had now 40 years ago. Can you tell us a little bit about that day in Talladega when you actually met him?
First of all, I'm excited to get the opportunity to finally tell my story about Joseph Helmick, a story I've prevented from telling previously by my own government. Joseph George Helmick was a U.S. Army warrant officer holding top secret clearance. He was stationed in an intelligence facility outside of Paris in the early 1960s. His job was as a crypto intelligence officer, which meant he transmitted, received, and decoded top secret military communications for the U.S. Army. In early 1963, CIA recruited my client for a particular spy mission that was going to occur later that fall of 1963. They trained him spycraft, and he was ready for this mission. In November, they told him to be ready late November and gave him the go signal. He had to be on a plane on November 22nd, 1963. He was ordered to do this prior to November 22nd, 1963. Early the morning of November 1963, Kennedy was still alive. Helmick gets on a plane for Paris, armed with top secret codes to give over to the Soviets. En route and mid-mission, Helmick hears over the plane's loudspeaker, Kennedy was assassinated. He gets off the plane, calls his handler, asks if he should still complete his mission, and his handler was absolutely, positively certain. He had to complete the mission. He does. He meets the Russians and delivers to the Soviets our top secret military codes following Kennedy's assassination. And the purpose for delivering that was so the Soviets, then our all-time arch enemy, Cold War enemy, would know the United States would not be retaliating against the Soviets for Kennedy's assassination, which means that someone or some intelligence organization knew well in advance what was going to take place and wanted to make sure they didn't trigger World War III. And the overall concept of this is that Helmick played a small but important and pivotal role in a conspiracy to assassinate John F. Kennedy.
It was consequential, to say the least, but let's take it back into a short timeline of things that were happening just before that. 61, Eisenhower leaves office, and he warns ominously that you've got to look out for the military-industrial complex, which in the book you actually say that could be replaced today with deep state. And he says this. JFK comes in, and makes a speech where he says, essentially, we can end this. We can bring the boys home, I think he said by 65, and 6 weeks from that, he's gone. And I think that is something that a tale as old as time. And Kevin, I started asking, are we in a simulation? Because today I could almost plug today's events into the same storyline and have something very close to that even today. And so I wanted to ask you, specific to, all of that happened and how it had an impact on the generation of young Americans. You waited a long time to tell this story. And as you know, your daughter and I were in TV production at Estero High School 30 years ago today. Let's go Wildcats, class of 98. Lauren and I were in TV production 30 years ago, and it was a big deal because there were big pieces of equipment. There were, licenses that had to be obtained to be able to really broadcast outside of your high school. And I remember learning about that. And when I think about even 30 years ago, if you had been able to tell your story after 10 years, it would have been incredibly difficult to have the reach that you have today. I mean, when I think about the advent of Amazon and the ability to publish a book to tell this story, you have so many shackles that were removed from you over time. How has that changed the way that you tell the story? I mean, was there a benefit in you having 40 years to get ready and to have the distribution of news catch up to you, or is this something that you've really struggled with holding in for 40 years?
Well, actually, I would have gotten it out in 1982 because I met Joseph Helmick at Federal Correctional Institute in Talladega, Alabama, summer of 82. He was convicted in Jacksonville in a highly publicized federal trial in fall of 1981, sentenced to life in prison for what he did. What I told you he did and transferred, that's not a hypothesis, as you indicated, or suggestion. That's a fact that our own government charged him with. But when I returned to Fort Myers, I began contacting national publishers. So I would have gotten it out, but almost immediately after contacting national publishers, I received a cease and desist letter from the Department of Justice threatening me with prosecution under the newly passed Identities Protection Act, which is an act they passed right after Helmick got convicted, coincidentally, that indicated if you outed or directly or indirectly a CIA agent's name, you could go to prison for that. So that was a pretty shocking letter. And I met with legal counsel. I talked to my wife, Darlene. At the time, I had 2 young children. You mentioned Lauren. She was 2 years old, I think. And we realized that I could not risk challenging the DOJ. One reason is if I did something, I had a letter, and that letter would have given them evidence that I intentionally disregarded their warning, which was a Latin term that we use in law school, mens rea. I had the intent to do it. So unfortunately, I couldn't do anything with the story because otherwise I'd face prosecution. But was even more threatening that we found out. I shared a building with an attorney. Our phones were tapped to the point it was almost crazy. They were so loud, everyone could hear the click, click, clicking. Our phones at home were tapped. My wife recalls talking to her mother, and someone listening, Mom, but go ahead, tell me about Grandma, whatever. And I thought, boy, they had terrible equipment. But then when I was getting ready for this, one of the consultants that I worked with on a book, who was a Secret Service agent himself and worked in special ops, he said, no, that I was incorrect. They had excellent equipment in the early 80s. That was a message they were giving to me. That loud noises, they wanted to know we were listening. And I didn't know that until I started writing the book. And I thought, well, that even makes it even more
ominous.
Striking, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. That's I can only imagine, because when I think back, okay, so in 82, you were just maybe a year and a half into having your practice established here in Fort Myers. A lot to lose.
A lot. I just started. I had with a firm on Fort Myers Beach. I just moved in to downtown Fort Myers to start my own practice. So I had that. I had a young family, and I was. If you ever follow litigation, you know that if the federal government indicts you and prosecutes you, the cost is immense. Even if you happen to win, if it's a criminal case, you're facing not only massive amounts of money, which will bankrupt you, but alternatively, for me, 30 years in prison. And I had been in Talladega prison before. I saw what it was like just less than a month before, and I realized what it was in that prison. I didn't want to go back.
I can understand that. The government has a way of convincing those to follow their lead, so to speak. No one could dispute, and no one could really argue that war is not an incredibly profitable activity, that it has for decades and ages has pushed economies through. There's a lot of money that gets spent. I think I was reading in your book that the budget for 2024 was at $842 billion, and we spend a lot of money on war. And it's like I say, this is people's jobs, and there's people that are tied into this that don't even really understand how they've fuel that machine, how they push that machine forward. And so it's interesting to see that. It's also interesting to see you had ties into the Midwest and growing up in Ohio and going to school in Ohio. But I noticed that in your book, you mentioned that 98 people from your home county died in the Vietnam conflict and the Vietnam War. What county are you from in Ohio?
Lorain County.
That's a lot of people. If you were to gather a room of people and you put 100 people into a room, that really, really drives it home. And I say that because everyone, I'm approaching 45 years old. I wasn't here when JFK was assassinated, but I can tell you it's an iconic moment. It's like maybe 9/11. It's like, some of these moments in our lifetimes where we associate a feeling, we associate a memory, it's burned, it's tattooed on our brain. And I sure we've all seen the film of JFK and we understand, but all of the people that fought and that lost in the Vietnam War, those a lot of times become a faceless victim. And so I think it's worth mentioning that just in your home county over this war, 98 people gave their life for it. And we can't help but wonder, was that necessary? And the lens of time, obviously allows us to look at it a little bit differently. But as we deal with essentially identical issues in today's political landscape, we can't help but look at this book as a way of saying, guys, this is history repeating itself. And I think it's a powerful book. I think that I especially like the photo section in the back of the book, by the way, that had a lot of really great photos that, again, can kind of help you understand that this was the Vietnam War. Here's how it was for me, Kevin. I was thinking about this earlier. I mentioned that I went to school with your kids, and I wasn't the valedictorian of my class of 98, but I liked history, and my parents liked history, but I did not come from a military family. I did not have any enlisted service members in my immediate family. My grandfather served in the Army, but we didn't talk about military. We didn't really talk a lot about conflict. And when I was in school, this is what was taught. Public school graduate here. World War I, World War II, Hitler's bad. The Korean War and the Vietnam War, I don't remember really ever even having to remember anything about it to pass a test. And I don't know if that's because of the amount of time that had passed from the end of the Vietnam War to when I was in school, and maybe it was still such a sensitive topic. But I was not taught about a lot of the stuff that I read about in the book, and a lot of the consequences that war brought upon our country and a generation of younger Americans, as you said, wasn't brought to me. So as I say this, and you're a friend, I say this, as a compliment. This book is an opportunity for me to maybe pick up something that I didn't get along the way, and that then when I can share with my kids. But why do you think it is, though, that public schools at that time didn't talk about that?
I think the Vietnam War was a turning point, like Kennedy. I point out in the book, this all started to spiral out of control once Kennedy got assassinated, because several weeks before he was assassinated, he signed an action memo indicating that by 1965, we would have all our troops out of Vietnam. He was not going to have those endless wars. Trump does not want endless wars. Kennedy did not want endless wars. There's a myriad number of similarities between Kennedy and Trump. They both Kennedy wanted to get us to the moon. Trump wanted to get us to Mars, and they both had their own issues with intelligence agencies. But and people don't realize that Kennedy was shot and killed November 22nd, 1963. And that was weeks after he signed an action memo. And the early part of November, there was a coup d'etat occurring in Vietnam, which was led by our own CIA, and took out both of the top people in Vietnam, South Vietnam, and replaced them with a military coup. That had happened time and time again under Allen Dulles. The CIA at that time was significantly involved in coup d'etats around the world, including one attempt that got that they had to get pulled back from to remove the president of France. That's how bold they were. And I point out, trying to be logical, not emotional, that it's not hard to imagine that a group of people, some powerful people, would have decided Kennedy had to be removed because he was going to scale back. And there's things that Kennedy was doing. He wanted the world to disarm, which was a great, noble thought. That, as I point out in the interview with the spy, could have had a visceral response from the Hawks. They did not like that. Kennedy didn't back them up, which you might not have learned at Farrell High School. He didn't back them up in the Bay of Pigs invasion. He was sort of trapped in that moment, and he did not decide to escalate. Thankfully, he didn't. The CIA had terrible intelligence. If Kennedy had launched, those Cuban commanders were told, as soon as the launch occurs, they were to launch Soviet missiles, which were armed with nuclear warheads, which could have rained down nuclear war on the eastern seaboard. That was the CIA's mistake. Kennedy didn't fall for it, but Kennedy did take the blame. If you recall, maybe not, he had a speech, victory has 1,000 fathers, an orphan has but one. He took the blame, but he was right. And I think that is among other reasons why they wanted to remove Kennedy. And at the time it was shocking. I think I was in 7th or 8th grade at the time. And to hear that happen, because I was in Catholic school and we were so proud of Kennedy. He was first Catholic president. And the world stood still for everyone, because for 3 days, nothing happened. Everyone sat in front of their TV sets and watched this. And then on Sunday morning, you wake up and see Oswald, his purported assassin, himself assassinated on live TV, which never happened. So it was pretty shocking time to be in.
Now, as far as that goes, and I can't help but look back and think, okay, so when Kennedy was assassinated, we were talking about households that gathered around the television, that would watch the nightly news report, that this would have been something that everything else would have went on the back burner. There wasn't anything that would have taken precedence over finding out what was going on. But that said, very few voices reporting the news, very few outlets to actually get opinions that would challenge the mainstream back then. How would that have been different today with X, with Facebook, with social media, with people being able to really say anything that they want? And I bring that back because, I can remember standing up and saying the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag every day in school, Benita Elementary. I remember saying it every single day. And now it's so completely opposite that you can go on to a social media platform today and you could say things that would have gotten me in a lot of trouble with my parents and grandparents back in the day. And you can say it with no real recourse in saying it. How would the Vietnam War, how would that have unfolded in today's media environment differently?
Probably, we'll take everyone back, and most of your viewers won't remember this, but we had 3 networks, 3 TV, ABC, NBC, and CBS, perhaps not in that order. That's all we had. There was no radio talk, no conservative talk radio, certainly no internet, no Twitter or X, nothing like that. So you got the news from that and the actual paper that was delivered in the morning to your house.
Nice and curated, nice and tight, nice and clean, and toeing the line. There was no.
But give the American people credit, because even immediately after Kennedy's assassination, more than 50% of the people in the United States never believed that Oswald was a lone gunman. That's never changed. There's never been less than a majority of people did not believe that Oswald was not working, was a lone gunman. And it got even greater as years went by. I would think that if this would have happened back then, just like now we're talking about the Epstein files and what happened to all these files, and you would never have believed the concept that some lone gunman who would have 3 shots. Now, in doing the book, I talked to a number of consultants, a lot of military people, law enforcement, Secret Service. The car was traveling away from him. So he got the first shot, maybe, in the back, perhaps. He missed the second shot. He missed the entire car, second shot. But we're to believe the third shot, when the car was even further away, he got dead on. Implausible, coupled with the fact he had no gunpowder residue. I'm an avid shooter. he would have had to take a shower after he left the book depository before he got arrested. Yeah. And when you saw some of the films where they're carrying a rifle, guy has no gloves on, carrying a rifle above his head, his fingerprints are on it. Oswald's fingerprints were never on it. There were so many things that, and the American people are smart. They realize this story they were told is the big lie theory that, as I point out in an interview with a spy, Joseph Goebbels told for Hitler's. And that the bigger the lie, more people will believe it.
Yeah. Well, you put a quote in the book, and you said that JFK never got credit for it, so I'll give it to him today. But the quote was that one person can make a difference, and everyone should try. And I think that that's a really good quote for anybody to take inspiration from. That is something that really he was an incredible leader. And a lot of people give him a lot of credit because he wasn't able to really finish what he started. But I would say that we live in a society today of ADHD, short attention span. We want the news, we want it now, and we want to be able to scroll on to the next thing. And so I kind of felt like when the JFK files and all of this came out, that society, by and large, didn't really give it what we always said that we would. If we got those files, right, we'd scrub through them and we'd find everything that we needed. And they released it, and we just said, bah, and moved right on to the next thing. And so how do we, how do we really learn from that and apply those lessons to where we are moving forward if we don't really have a good view of how that happened? And the book is called Interview with a Spy, Revelations on the John F. Kennedy Assassination and the Impact on My Generation of Young Americans. Kevin F. Jursinski. It's available on Amazon.com. I'd love to invite you to pick up a copy. I'm going to ask him to sign my copy today while I'm here. Let's see. There are other parts of the book, Kevin, that you felt like have not been talked about.
Well, I think specifically what it meant to be a young man. I mean, women weren't drafted then. Some women actually served in Vietnam military. A few died, but the 58,000 young men did die. And the thing about the draft was, as I point out, every powerful country in the history of the world always has to have a warrior class, a group of people that will fight for their country. The draft, however, picked out everyone randomly. It could be, not to pick on accountants or someone, but someone that maybe wasn't athletic or wasn't outgoing and never shot a gun, wasn't an outdoorsman, wanted to stay inside. Those people were drafted and put into the most brutal conditions you'll ever get. I just talked on Friday with my client who was a captain in the Army, a highly decorated Vietnam vet, special forces, and he went out with his recon platoon, and every one of his soldiers were killed in front of him, and his helmet got grazed with a 50 caliber bullet. But those are the things that just affected everyone. And these people came home, but instead of coming home like now, the guys come home, we welcome them, heroes. They were, treated with derision. They just were looked down upon. And what was also, I point out in the book, interestingly enough, not only did I have friends in Vietnam, my brother was in Vietnam, friends that died there, but then where I was going to school, Kent State, we had our own government, National Guard, march on our campus, shoot 13 people, killing 4 peaceful protesters, and marched on our campus with fixed bayonets. That is absolutely a chilling and intimidating fact. But then
another incident that was never brought up in history, in school. We never really talked about that.
And it only got worse the following year because that Kent State turned into the epicenter of anti-Vietnam protests. But the dichotomy of knowing people were serving in Vietnam and dying while you saw your other fellow students protesting the war, it was hard to take. And that was the impact and effect upon young men my age, where you had friends dying and other friends protesting and challenging the war. And it's hard to reconcile. It was a very traumatic time. And I think, my opinion, that was a major turning point in America. Perhaps the end of idealism at the time. We're trying to get that back, perhaps with Trump, but it was a turning point, and it really hurt our country because from that point on, Kennedy assassination, certainly, half the country didn't believe what they were being told by their own government. And I know myself, when my own government threatened me with prosecution for releasing information and then scoffed at the thought that Helmick was in any way related to the CIA, I knew there was something wrong firsthand. And the book goes into a lot more on it, but I enjoyed doing the book. I thought in some ways it was cathartic for me to talk about it again. And sometimes I get choked up about thinking about some of the people that died.
Yeah, I can understand that for sure. That's a pretty dark subject matter when you think about that. And I think that's the part that maybe we've tried to not talk about as a society, and we just try to go on. But, like I said, when I was a kid, I said I was taught to respect the flag. I was taught to respect service members, people that served our country, because the reality is some people say, well, I don't like war. I don't like fighting. Well, do you like when there's a hurricane? Do you like when a soldier shows up and helps deliver water and supplies and humanitarian aid and builds bridges and gets the road back so that we can get our life back in order? You like that part? Then you like the military, and you got to support the good with the bad, because if we didn't have a warrior culture, like you said, then when there was supplies like that, other countries would come in and they would steal them. And so you got to have both. And so I was taught in my generation, the 80s, to respect that and to really, appreciate it. So I remember saying, why is this woman spitting in the soldier's face?
Right.
And so there was just a lot of history that I didn't get, that passed by me, that maybe it wasn't relative to what I was doing then, but it actually really was relative. It really was a message that should have been talked about. It really was something that was a dark chapter in our family as a country's history that we should have talked about. And I got to tell you, it's always laughable, Kevin, that it's the lone wolf. Even like last year, that we're willing to say, yeah, we let this one chump get through all of our security protocols, everything that we plan for and that we work so hard for every day, and spend a ton of money, by the way, Kevin, to make sure that those that we're safe. It's this loser that just gets through the cracks and ends up being hugely consequential to generations to come. So I always kind of laugh about the lone wolf.
I formed a security company because I was criminal law undergrad with my brother. We would have never allowed that to happen. And we were T-shirt security for major concerts, but to allow a shooter on top of a building to be sitting there for 20 minutes, I indicate in my book, I call it planned negligence. I don't know, I've never heard the phrase before. I coined it, but basically someone decided to indicate to others, maybe change your tactics, let down your guard, there's something there, as you point out. This young kid shouldn't have 10 different, I don't know anybody, and I know a lot of people that have 10 different cell phones. I can see someone having a burner phone, but 10 different cell phones? I mean, nothing adds up. And again, just like Lee Harvey Oswald, just like Kennedy, we know nothing about what happened that day except some kid on a bike rides up in plain sight and sits on the top of a roof and positions himself to kill the president when no one sees it. And I point out things are happening in plain sight, and we just look at it and wonder what's going on. So, and I want to be that one voice, as I point out in the book, and hope that other people will come forward also and speak up for what they think. And at least that's what we have now, what we didn't have before. We have a voice, because there's all kind of ways to express yourself. And I'm doing that with my book.
And anyone that gets it, Kevin, is going to love this book. It's available on Amazon.com. It's Interview with a Spy, Revelations on the John F. Kennedy Assassination and the Impact on My Generation of Young Americans. Now, I don't want to give away really anything else. I want to make them get your book and read it. But I wanted to ask you just now, and shift gears, and ask you what it's like to publish a book. Because it's not your first time publishing. You actually published an article in 2010 in the Florida Bar Journal, and that talked about the foreclosure crisis. I had a chance to read that as well. But, let's go back to 82. If you were writing the book, you'd have the typewriter. You might get a lake cottage somewhere where you could, write uninterrupted. And you might, be burning candles and having tea and things like that. And you'd come up with a manuscript and you'd take it to a publisher, and the publisher would take some time with it. And then they would say, I don't know if I've got a market for it or not. It's still pretty hot topic right now. A lot of people. And then you would go, maybe you would push forward and you would publish that yourself, and you would pay a lot of money to do it. And you would get a room full of books, and then you'd have to find people that would buy them. And I know today, obviously, it's a lot different. But tell me a little bit about the process of putting out a book, because part of what I'm trying to do with Title Adam in the House is not just talk about title insurance, but just talk about success and ways that people are making things happen. And I know that when I bought this equipment to do a podcast, that a lot of people reached out to me and said, well, I was just getting ready to do a podcast. I actually had been thinking about it. I have a name for it that I wanted to do. And, and so I said, well, I won't gatekeep. I'll try to share some of the experience that I have, some good and bad and ugly. But so let me ask you, as somebody who just published a book and is now promoting it, which is really awesome, by the way, what's that like? Can you share with us a little bit about how long did it take to write the book?
Yeah, absolutely. It took quite a while, probably a better part of a year, but I researched it for several years. Just going back, the trial was a nationally publicized trial, all the new networks and New York Times. So when I started preparing for the book, first thing I did was I wanted to get the entire trial file to read it. You'd think, and I know the law pretty well. I practice at a high level, and I know what federal clerk has to do, and they're required by law to maintain records, especially records of significance. A major espionage case should be available. No one could find the file. The file was missing. The attorneys didn't have it. I made FOIA requests. They didn't have it. The U.S. Attorney's Office didn't have it. The clerk didn't have it. No one had it. So I had to hire a cold case murder detective, which is pretty appropriate for Kennedy files. And it took him 2 years to find the file. He found it in a Georgia warehouse. If you remember Raiders of the Lost Ark, when one of the guys went into the warehouse with all those files, that's what he said it looked like. It was massive. And we finally got the file. I think I'm one of the few people I left in my book codes. Whoever wants to get it can go ahead and acquire it. It's quite expensive, but you can get the file. And I read the whole thing in conjunction with Helmick's memoirs, which no one else has. I have. The only people that have read it have been myself and my wife, Darlene. Kept that hidden for 40 years. I have that, plus all the other information. Helmick's file got FBI file, Operation Hookshot, got declassified. I read that in the trial file, and that's when I started putting things together as an attorney, what I'm taught to do. Take the facts and logically apply them. I use inductive and deductive reasoning to arrive at a position that I think is irrefutable, because the facts I rely on are facts that I'm not making up or considering or suggesting. They're facts. Our government advocated. The FBI prosecuted Helmick for it. The government, the DOJ, brought him to trial on it, and he was convicted and served his life doing that very thing. I don't know why no one connected the dots in all the investigations about this, because it was a significant, but small but significant part of the Kennedy assassination. Some organization, you call it the CIA, whatever group it was, wanted to make sure the Soviets knew that we were not going to retaliate. And they wanted to ensure that America would not be attacked by the Soviets. It wouldn't be a trigger for World War III, which happened, as you pointed out earlier, in 1962, the year before. We came very, very close to World War III and a Cuban Missile Crisis. And Helmick, in his very first chapters, gripping on his own memoirs, he talks about communicating, having top secret communications. And he said if the world knew what he was reading, there had been worldwide panic. We were that close to war. We didn't want to have it happen again. And someone or some organization blocked that by having the Soviets for themselves. And what Helmick told me, why did we go to the lab? He says, because why didn't we just give the Soviets the information? His position was, I think it's well stated, what his CIA handlers told him, they would never believe it if we gave it to them. They would only believe it if they stole it. And they paid him $131,000, proven in a court record, which is $1.3 million today. Not an insignificant amount of money for information. So it was getting all that information, and then I tried to reach out to a number of publishers, and I interviewed a number, and I found a group down in Naples that one of my friends was a writer with them, Big Cat Creative. They did an excellent job. They were very interested in the book, got excited about it, and helped me every step of the way. It's immeasurable, the things they did, and I write every day. I can't imagine all the different things and nuances of language. My wife's an English teacher, so she would appreciate that. But just to get the book right, to have it done in a proper context, so the reader would enjoy it, and rather than having a boring book by an attorney, that they'd put it down after 3 pages if it was written by an attorney. But we tried to make it exciting and interesting, but factual. Everything we put in the book is absolutely factual, including every historical point and we arrive at the conclusion. And I think, my opinion, my logical conclusion of what took place is far more believable and factually supportable than the Warren Commission's fairy tale that they sold to the American people, which half the people never believed from day one. From day one. Now, if that came out today, it would be laughed at. Right now, we're having a big debate. Where are the Epstein files?
Right.
I mean, they're just gone.
Yeah.
So it was very interesting to do. I sort of a passion to get this done, but I really enjoyed getting it out. So hopefully that's a long-winded answer from an attorney.
That's a great answer. Yeah, and like I said, it's something that I can tell that you did enjoy doing it. I know that when I've worked with you, I would describe you as meticulous. I would describe you as driven by fact. I would describe you as someone who understands high stakes. And so clearly there was motivation to tell your story, but also to tell it right. And I would just say, just anecdotally, the tone of the book is actually, it's written in a great, refreshing tone. It's not boring. You almost shouldn't say that you're an attorney when you introduce the book, because then people think it's going to be written in this, hard to read, and it's not. As a matter of fact, I think in one of the very first in the introduction, you kind of let a little flavor fly, and I just really enjoyed it. And then reading about the way that you described yourself as a student in Akron, and you talked a little bit about maybe you weren't the best student, and this is again another chapter in the book, but I think that you told it in a way that people are going to be able to read it, and they're going to be able to relate, and they're going to be able to see that this isn't conspiracy. This is facts. This is, again, an attorney telling you a story the way that you need to hear it. The book, again, is on Amazon.com. I'm posting the link in the notes below. I hope that you'll check it out. Kevin, thanks for having us on and for telling us a little bit about your book. Great. Thanks again, Kevin.
Thank you.
That's a wrap on Title Adam in the House. Subscribe, share, and tag in Title Adam when it's time to close. You want to be a guest? Book your spot. The link's in the show notes.